you are aware that this could start some sort of retaliation or fallback on you, and you're good with still wanting to do this?
Yeah, I am good with doing it. I think it's important that people speak out about their experiences, and sometimes you have to take some risks in order to do that.
Quick introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, you and Walton County Sheriff's Office?
Sure. I'm a military brat who relocated here or located here when I was a teenager, so I consider Walton County my home. I absolutely love this county. I love the people in this county. I've always felt very compelled to be a part of this community. When I was very young, I left to become a law enforcement officer in Escambia County. I did a couple of years over there, and then I went over to Jacksonville for a little while, about less than a year, and then I went north because I had met somebody important to me who later married. And then I finally came home. I came home in the Ralph Johnson era. I worked through Ralph Johnson, left a couple times between Ralph and Mike, and finished out a total of 13 years with Walton County. Still love this county. Still think that this is an amazing place to be. Can't say a bad thing about us.
Right on. And what we're going to be doing here is we went back and forth on either I was going to put your info out either vocally or written, as I've done others, and then you decided you wanted to write it down so that me or Aaron didn't have to answer any questions. But then we were like, okay, look, we're going to do a video because people need to see you. And you ended up writing a 3-page article for me, and you titled it The Walton Way. So I'm going to be asking you questions I have based off of the words that you put on that paper, and we'll expand from there.
Sure.
All right, so let's go ahead and start off with what prompted you to want to speak out?
I saw a post from an individual that was defending Mike and how Mike manages the sheriff's department. And a part of me really wanted to fire back on that post, and how it bothered me that the post was so defensive of everything that he's done. And I didn't fire back. I held back and I thought about it for a while, and then I realized, quite frankly, it's that person's perspective, and everybody's allowed to have a perspective. That's reality. So the issue then became for me, well, what's your perspective, Keri? Why does this bother you so much? Why is it so hitting so hard in your heart that you need to respond to that? And the answer was, because my experience wasn't or isn't the same as the experience of the person who put it out there. And I felt like, you know what? I have a right to speak out. I have a right to say that not everybody has had great experiences at Walton County. But frankly, most people can't speak out. If they're still employed by the county in any capacity, they can't speak out. If they do, then they'll be blacklisted.
All right, and we're going to get into that. So you decided you wanted to put your voice out there because you have firsthand experience with it. And you mentioned that current workers could feel threatened or lose their jobs, and we're going to get into that. But first, we're going to start back to, let's go ahead and just start your history in and talk about when you first started. I noticed that you mentioned Ralph Johnson, and that's the previous sheriff.
Oh, yeah.
And in your write-up, you mentioned policy by memo you want to go over a little bit of what you meant by policy by memo?
Sure. So Ralph Johnson, I really don't know how he got elected, but it was kind of one of those things. Everybody was tired of Quinn, and he got elected. And we had everything was done by memo back then. There was no policy manual, and there was a clipboard in most of the substations or a memo book. And you had to keep up with the memos because one memo would contradict the last memo, and it was just a very confusing time.
And you talk
so
about
when
surveillance also.
Yeah, and when the end of his era came about, one of the things that Ralph created was this narcotics unit or vice unit that really nobody knew about. That we called them the secret squirrels, and they would run around the entire county doing surveillance, not only on criminals but on citizens as well, especially during the election. And it was not uncommon to think that you were being watched during the election or conversations about fear-driven behavior during the election because he was spying on everybody. Well, when Mike took office, he fixed a lot of that because he actually did get us a policy manual, and he actually did get a lot of things going in the right direction. He even did away with the secret squirrel unit that was, everybody wanted it gone. But now, since I've left the office, or just before I left the office, that secret squirrel unit has popped back up, driven by the idea that we have to protect the identity of the officers who are in that unit so that they can be out there doing covert work. Unfortunately, if you know what's going on, they're not doing a whole lot of covert work on necessarily bad people. They're doing a lot of covert work on good people. And that's unfortunate because that shouldn't be the way an organization runs. And it shouldn't be a way that deputies are concerned about their families or themselves because of this secret squirrel unit that's running around doing surveillance.
And in your article, you mentioned compliance by fear. What, you want to expand on that?
Yeah. So anytime you articulate or have concerns about policy or violations of policy or deputies not doing their job, or bringing up anything that is sacred to Mike and his group or his regime, it instantly becomes, you're blacklisted. And it's important to understand that deputies understand that, and deputies know that there is always a shadow of concern about their careers and their futures within the sheriff's department.
And so you explained a little bit about the policy by memo. Oh, we got the bell going off. So what building did you say that was in the background?
That's the Chautauqua building.
Chautauqua building.
And the bell is from the church just beyond it. And
excellent. So if y'all haven't noticed, we're on this, what is the lake called? I've never been up here.
This is Chipley Park and Lake Defuniak.
Lake Defuniak. So a lot of y'all might have noticed the scenery.
It's a beautiful place.
But yeah, so if you want, you talk about it feeling like it's come back in the last 4 years, and you feel that's in actual policy?
So no, the issue with policy is, you can write a policy, and but if you don't stick to it, then because of either favoritism or it doesn't apply to this, or as people say, oh, it's just a guideline. Well, then the policy becomes subjective, right? And when you're in a leadership role and you create policy that's subjective based on each circumstance, then policy really doesn't exist. And that's the culture that currently is running rampant, because policy for one person will be strict and black and white. But if it was another person doing the same offense, then it becomes gray and, well, maybe he was misunderstood or whatever the case may be, but it's not enforced the same way. So policy, even in Mike's words, it's just a guideline. Well, if you're a deputy that's in favor, or a sergeant that's in favor, and the guideline that is created is in your favor all the time, but there's a deputy or a sergeant that the policies and guidelines are enforced on. Where is the fairness? Where is the consistency in that? And that's the problem with it. The policy's written, but nobody follows it.
And we're going to talk more about fairness a little bit later in your article. Let's go ahead and talk about the initial election that Mike came into Walton County Sheriff's Office. In here you speak about he came into Walton County with a lackluster career and was appointed to a leadership position within the city marshal office. What do you mean by lackluster career?
Well, I mean, everybody knows that Mike really had no background in leadership. He worked in Tallahassee with, I believe, probation and parole or Tallahassee PD, but he had never been in a leadership position. And he got appointed to marshal, and he kind of sat over there long enough to develop some leadership background. And the first opportunity that came about to run him against Ralph Johnson, they took it. Meaning the city founders, I guess, the people who wanted Ralph out. Ralph, and there was no competition. The powers that be were supporting Mike at the time, and Mike didn't have to do much to get elected. It was one of those situations where nobody liked Ralph. So all Mike had to do was show up.
Now you say all he had to do was show up, but you also mentioned that there was still bullying and intimidation of employees.
Oh yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So in the world of politics, deputies should not be politicking or advocating for any candidate while on duty.
And were they?
Oh yeah. And I came from other agencies where you did not do it. You did not do it. It was against the law. You kept your personal opinion completely out of work.
And without naming names, do you believe those individuals are still in Walton County Sheriff's Office?
Oh, 100%. They're in Walton County Sheriff's Department. They spent their entire deputy career under Ralph doing everything they could to get Mike into office. They campaigned on duty. They implied threats to officers who were not willing to do campaigning.
And what kind of threats, if you know?
Oh, it was, you got to do better. Everything's got to be, you got to support Mike or we'll never get rid of Ralph. And if you don't support Mike, well, you're just never going to have a career. And you got to tell Mike you're in it for him. And it was bad.
And you mentioned you were approached by a captain and solicited for votes.
That particular individual was a deputy at the time, okay. Now is a captain. So, supporting Mike through the first election and now to this current election is key to his success, which we all understand, right? But it should not be done on duty, nor should it be done in a way where people are feeling intimidated that if they don't come out and openly support Mike, that there's some kind of ramifications or negative results are going to occur from not supporting Mike. And it was very abundantly clear that in that first election, he was not going to support people that didn't support him. He was not going to take care of people. It was so clear to those of us who were trying to stay neutral and out of it that people who had come from other agencies sought union representation.
And at the time, whenever you were expressing that, hey, you weren't going to put your opinion out there while on duty, you weren't going to do any of that solicitation, do you think that your actions affected you later in your career?
100%.
All right, we're going to go into that also. Many officers, in your article, you say many officers that were here watched, and the election bullying became evident and suggested that you all get union representation.
Yep, we did.
How did Mike feel about that, by your opinion?
Oh, it wasn't my opinion. It was very clear. Mike was 100% against it. He had several meetings about it. And he declared in no uncertainty that any deputy that sought union representation and or brought the union in, he was an at-will sheriff, and he would get rid of us.
Was there any one deputy that steps out that rings a bell in your mind that was for unionization and maybe something happened?
Yeah, two. Todd McQuillan, who passed away from heart disease, and Colin Corain.
And I've heard the name Colin Corain before, and it did surround a few things. One was his, had the same mindset from what I heard of you, is not supporting while on duty, but he also, I think he openly supported Ralph. Is that true? Do you know?
I don't know that
You don't know that?
I don't know who he supported. I think for the most part, all of us in our own way supported Mike because we knew change was important.
Got it.
But we didn't like what was going on, and we didn't like what it appeared was going to happen, and in fact has happened.
But he was a proponent for pushing for a union.
Oh yeah, he was.
And what ended up ultimately happening to him, and do you think it was because of him wanting the union?
So I don't remember all of the details that happened to Colin. I know that Colin's a good man, and he's no longer with us.
Yeah, I did hear he unfortunately took his life, or lost his life last year.
Yep. So Colin was promoted to sergeant under Ralph, and there were a lot of people that were upset about it. And unfortunately, in the promotion to sergeant, he got arrested, and a lot of feelings got hurt over that set of circumstances. Colin acted a little bit unprofessional. All the other people acted a lot unprofessional, and the charges were dropped. But meanwhile, Colin faced an option to stay in Florida or leave Florida and go into law enforcement. He ultimately left Florida and moved away. A few years later, he came back, and he was hired in Okaloosa County, which is where the remainder of his career laid. I don't know what happened in Okaloosa County. I know that he was very popular over there. I wish I knew more. I just know that it's a sad day that man is not present, because he had a powerful influence and was a great person and a good law enforcement officer. And we lost a really good man that we shouldn't have lost.
Yeah, and even though I didn't know him, I went through Facebook and I looked up his name, and the amount of pictures with him smiling and with the kids, it looked like the kids loved having him as their RSO, or the resource officer, and it did look like he was popular and loved by the community. I'm going to probably do another video on him. It's just hard to get a lot of records these days, but we're going to go ahead and move along and get back into your article. Mike ultimately gets the votes, becomes the sheriff, and starts creating the new policy.
Yep.
And is it followed?
No. It's all about which policies they want to follow and which policies, and who's breaking the policy to determine if they're going to do anything about it. Discipline is very subjective and random. It's sad. It's really sad.
And you mentioned if policy is, say, disregarded, does the leadership take the same steps on punishment for those individuals that get caught not following policy?
No, it's random. Discipline is random. And it can be something really simple, and you could get, a solid punishment out of it, or it could be extremely grievous, and it's just very random.
So, in your opinion, say you've got two individuals break the same policy, however, one has, let's say, more popularity than the other, even though they broke the same policy. Have you ever seen the situation happen where someone gets punished more than the other based on popularity?
Yes.
Okay. So,
yeah, popularity is or influence is powerful, and that's why I can't support Mike. Like that's the whole premise of why it becomes a struggle, because you have a good deputy who's doing the exact same thing as his leadership is doing. He's following his leadership, but because he's not in the power of influence of the sheriff or the sheriff's cronies, then he can be punished more.
And say in the ultimate punishment they lose their job, does it stop at just, hey, we're terminating you?
No, it depends on how they feel about you. Some people, they'll pull the standards on for an offense and the guy cannot get a job. Other people, they won't pull the standards on, and the offenses aren't the same.
Now, when you say pull the standards, what do you mean? What standards are they?
So in order to be in law enforcement, you have your standards, criminal justice training and standards through FDLE. An agency can terminate you, and there are certain things that trigger through FDLE your license, your criminal justice training standards certificate to be removed. Those are called your standards.
And what happens if you lose those?
Can't get a job.
Can't get a job. And have you known people that once they've been terminated, they didn't think anything else was going to happen, but then all of a sudden they go off, Walton County goes after their standards?
Yes.
And do those people have a job?
So they have an opportunity to go to FDLE and sit through a hearings process in order to retain their standards. However, it seldom goes in their favor. And because I've left, I don't know who and which ones have lost their standards and which ones have not.
And in your article, you used the word blacklisted, so that's practically what happened.
Well, blacklisting is a little different. Blacklisting is where they let you have your standards, but then you got to go find another job. And when you know, in a normal organization, let's say I go to apply for a job at I don't know, let's just say Bay County, and I get up to the last of the hiring process, and they call over to HR. The question should be, were they employed there? Yes. When did they start? When did they leave? And did they leave in good standing? Well, a lot of times it doesn't have that way. A lot of times it happens, did they work there? Yes. And then some phone calls are made on the backside, and not necessarily through HR, but people are told not to hire the person or whatever the case may be, and you can't get a job.
And do some of those individuals that do those backdoor calls, to your knowledge, still work at Walton County Sheriff's Office?
Absolutely.
All right, so Mike is in office, and he has now created testing for promotion.
Correct. Which was a good thing.
Which is a good thing, because you had mentioned, you know, he did come in and kind of tidy up what others say Ralph wasn't doing. So, and part of that was creating testing for promotion.
Mm-hmm.
But let me ask you this: were those tests for promotion equal to all?
So when he first started, he would either hire a company to create the tests, or he would buy the tests from companies that do it. But people couldn't pass the test, and or he didn't like who made the top of the test. So what happened was, when people complained about the test being too hard, or they couldn't pass the test, or they couldn't get on the list, he just turned it over to his sergeants and his lieutenants and some of the deputies and said, write your own test. So after the tests were written, HR would kind of glance over it and approve it, and it would go out. And so the deputies and the sergeants and lieutenants who wrote the test then had an advantage over anybody else. And then the lists were created. When he first took office, the lists of people would be published. You would actually get to see where you fell on the list. But shortly after that, when they realized that you could see yourself on the list and he should follow the list or close to the list, like you don't have to pick number 5 if you prefer number 6, but regardless, you should stay kind of intact with the list. The list became a problem, so we stopped producing the list for anybody to see.
So would you say that's pretty much getting rid of some transparency?
Oh yeah, it's 100% getting rid of transparency. And then add to it that if the list gets down to people they don't want at all, let's say the list is good for 2 years. Well, now they're at 15 months and they don't like who's on the list. They'll just retest for sergeant and make people go through it again. And sadly, they'll even go outside of policy and they'll promote people with letters of, I can't think of the word, I just went blank.
Discipline?
Thank you, discipline, in their file, which is strictly outside of the policy. And they'll promote somebody over a good candidate just because they don't like the candidate that could be promoted for whatever reason.
So are you saying promotions at Walton County Sheriff's Office under Mike Atkinson have not been based on merit, education, veterans points, or time in position?
No, not at all. There are policies in the Sheriff's Department that say that if you've done 2 years as an FTO, you should be immediately promotable because that's a first line supervisor position. Yet he rarely promotes anybody off of that list.
Well, do you have any promotion story that involves you directly?
Yeah.
Would you tell us about that?
Yeah. So for those people who are going to say, that I wasn't qualified, I didn't get it, I will tell you that I have a 4-year degree. I worked as an FTO. I've worked in supervisor positions outside of Walton County. And I tested for sergeant numerous times and never made sergeant, which seems to me, when you compare my resume to other people's resume, I outshined them. And I knew right then it was a popularity contest and it was okay. Like, I didn't like it because it affected me financially down the road. It affected my goals and dreams, but it is a popularity contest. Flash forward to, I had come back from a contract with DOD, and they needed a training sergeant. I worked in the position as a training sergeant for probably a year and a half, and I put in for the training sergeant's position. There was really no candidates that measured up to me at all, but they found somebody to go against me. And what was funny was, in the hallway after he interviewed, he asked me something, and I was giggling because he thought it was a 40-hour-a-week job, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, sitting at a desk. And I kind of giggled, and I said, buddy, I'm here at 7 in the morning. I opened this building up, and I don't leave until all the paperwork is filed, and sometimes that's 7 or 8 o'clock at night. There is no support, and you do work weekends. And he immediately said, well, if they offer it to me, I'm not taking it because I'm not working that many hours. And I told him, and you're not compensated for that time because they don't have a budget for overtime for for anything in training, yet they don't have enough people at the time to support the training command. So you have to do it or the whole training department falls apart.
And that was for sergeant?
That was for sergeant. I sat in that position about another 15 months, and the opportunity to promote to lieutenant came up. And how they do lieutenant's positions is they give you a project, and then you have to present the project to a group of people, all of the command staff, and as many people in admin as they can get into the conference room for the interview process. When my opportunity came up, the room had about 40 people in it.
Now, sorry to cut you off, but during your interview portion, was there anything unusual or that stood out to you for this promotion? And I say that because of one thing you wrote in here. You speak about individuals being called up to do promotions if you think someone is maybe in line to get it and they don't want it to get it. So was there anything specific that stood out to you during this promotion?
Sure. So I went through the promotion process, and on the day of promotion, a particular individual who was also a sergeant, we had gotten promoted about the same time, showed up at the interview process.
Was that a surprise to you?
It was a surprise because he was out on FMLA for the birth of his child. And by law, you can't be called back for anything if you're out on FMLA. And I knew right then that he was the candidate for promotion. That was the end of the conversation. That was the guy that was going to get promoted. Meanwhile, after the review, the interviews and all this other stuff, I had several people who would not normally have talked to me because I wasn't favored, come up to me and say, "Man, that was the best interview, best presentation. You did excellent. We're going to look forward to working with you as a lieutenant," all this other stuff. And I kind of, in my mind, I stayed optimistic, but I knew that the candidate that came in off of FMLA was the candidate that was going to get promoted. And in fact, he was, along with a couple of other people who my resume and my performance, I knew outweighed them.
And do you believe that those people were pulled in just so you wouldn't get the promotion?
One person definitely was pulled in, not because they weren't going to give me the promotion, but because they were going to give it to him regardless. So it wouldn't have mattered if he didn't show up at that interview or another interview. He was going to get it. It was a done deal.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read a little excerpt from your article you wrote. And for the listeners and viewers, I'm going to post this entire write-up so that you can go back and read, because there's things we may have not covered. And I'll post her 3-page article that she labeled The Walton Way on my Facebook, and you'll be able to find the link below. Let's look at some promotions that should concern citizens. A captain was promoted after a sex scandal with a subordinate. A captain, a lieutenant, and a sergeant were all promoted after several complaints about a hostile work environment. The sergeant was promoted during a Family Medical Leave Act. I think we just went over that. And other sergeants were promoted because they had tried for a long time and it was their turn. Now I'm going to hit on that last one. When you say it was just their turn, does that mean they may not have successfully achieved the promotion board or your standards, but they just got it because they had been there for so long?
They got it because they'd been there so long and they supported Mike, no matter what. It wouldn't matter if if Mike ran through a yard full of children in his SUV. They would support Mike. It was just a bad day, and so he just promotes them.
And in this type of promotion environment, what do you think that does to the fresh deputies, the individuals that are wanting to do a long career? How do you think it makes them feel? And do you believe we've lost people because of the culture under the promotion system here?
Oh, 100%. You've lost people because deputies don't have faith in their leadership. They don't believe that their leadership has the knowledge or the skill level to lead them. They walk around in frustration because there's leadership out there that doesn't even know the statute book. And then they try to enforce stuff with deputies who do know the statute book. But if deputies push the envelope or push the issue, they'll be working midnights in some remote place and they'll just bury them and they'll make their lives miserable.
So there's more retaliation.
Oh, more retaliation. Anybody who pushes the envelope. And because you have no sounding board with the unions or sounding board with any competency, you can't win.
And because these deputies see what's going on, do you think that could affect their work ethic? Like maybe make them not work as hard because they know it won't pay off?
I'm telling you right now that deputies, literally, who are good deputies, are not sitting under that tree in the shade because they want to. They're sitting under that tree in the shade because if they do anything, they'll get in trouble.
So it's about survival.
It's 100% about survival. I also know that if things don't change within this organization, I know of at least 3, maybe more deputies that I've had conversations with that have their applications submitted to other organizations and they're just waiting to hit the send button. They're waiting for hope, for the opportunities that maybe a new command. They don't want to leave Walton County. They love it here. They want to continue to support and protect our citizens. They want to be involved, but they also want to be able to do their jobs and feel like they're not working in intimidation.
And that ultimately affects the turnover rate. And I know at the Mossy Head campaign event, there was a question posed to Sheriff Atkinson about turnover. Well, he ended up talking about going to statistics and either national and state statistics, and pretty much blew it off saying, oh, we're fine. But does this type of promotion culture affect the turnover rate?
100%. So you have District 1, which is up here in the north end of the county, and then you have District 2, which is Freeport, and then 3 and 4 down on the south end. Of course, the south end of the county gets the most people because it's so hard to get around, and that makes sense. If you think about it, it's more like a city in that the density and the population is so much, especially in season, that it's hard to get around. So you have to have more people in order to get in and out of the community. Anybody who lives on 30A knows that there's really no way to traverse 30A safely without people coming in from other directions. So it kind of makes sense. District 1 has the highest number of calls, which is up here. So it's typically manned well. And you have to understand that's your voting base. Like for years and years and years, the north end of the district carried the vote. These are the people who show up to vote because this is their community, this is their hometown. And now you have Freeport. Well, for years, there was nothing in Freeport. Like Freeport was no man's land. And typically it ran with 1 or 2 deputies 24 hours a day. And that was it. Jay Odom came in and built Hammock Bay. And now you have Riverwalk and LaGrange Bayou and Owl's Head. And schools are blowing up everywhere. And to this day, you're still running with 2 or 3 deputies. Well, there's a whole lot of issues with that. And you know, people are yelling for deputies down there, but for whatever reason, Mike doesn't support that community. Well, that's sad. I can't speak for why he doesn't support that community. But here's another issue you have to understand. You have 2 or 3 deputies running from Okaloosa County line all the way into Freeport. That's part of the district. Now you're going to continue down Highway 20 and you're going to run all the way to the Bay County line and all the river camps, Highway 81 up to Rock Hill Road, and throw in, for those of you people that don't know it, a community called Steelfield and Bunker. They don't ever send deputies out there. Deputies rarely go out on Highway 81. The river camps get a lot of attention because there's crime out there. But on a good day, let's just say 5 o'clock in the afternoon, if a deputy needs backup and his only backup is coming from, example, Hammock Bay, and he's out in the river camps, how do you think his backup's getting to him? There's only one way in, Highway 20 and 3280. So there is no backup. There is no support. These guys are out there defending you and your community and doing it in a way that honestly is dangerous. And it shouldn't be happening. Not in today's world with the technology that we currently have. That should be one of the things that should be fixed. And it just never gets fixed. The turnover rate is directly related to the culture within the agency. And, you know, when you bully and intimidate people as they're coming into the agency, then you're not going to be able to keep them. And there is not a reason in the world why a deputy would not stay here. We can talk about economics. We can talk about everything under the sun. Yes, I think that deputies need to be paid more money than what they're getting because it is expensive to live in Walton County. But that's not what keeps a deputy from coming here, and it is not what keeps a deputy from leaving. The culture is what's causing this environment. People are leaving because they just, I mean, personally, I left. I retired early because I had no respect for the men and some of the women that were running the command in our office. Like, I had no respect. I couldn't look at them in the face and say, I respect you as a leader. So why would I stay? And why would I pretend that that's the way it should be or lead people in that direction?
So you retired early. You feel like maybe if that culture wasn't in place, you think you'd possibly still be on the job today just because you enjoyed it?
Yeah, I would have stayed at least till my 25th year. And I left at 18 in the state of Florida because I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't look at the men and the women in that building that were in leadership positions and just not seethe with anger towards them.
And I noticed since we're about to wrap this up, I'm going to go into some questions a little bit later, and that's going to be questions that were based on our phone call that you didn't put in the article. But I noticed you brought something with you. Would you mind grabbing that?
Sure.
Explain to me what you have in your hand.
So an officer who completes 10 years with Walton County Sheriff's Department is supposed to receive their retirement with a posthumous promotion to the next level. So in essence, I retired as a sergeant, and I should have been posthumously promoted to lieutenant, and I would receive my duty weapon as part of my retirement. Instead, this is what I received. I did not get promoted to lieutenant, which is fine. That's fine. And I got this wonderful box. Inside it should be my pistol. Unfortunately, somehow, somewhere, the pistol didn't show up.
So you were given an empty box with ultimately the incorrect rank on it based on tradition and maybe, was it policy also, or tradition?
I really don't remember if it was policy. Like I said, policy was random and not followed, so it doesn't remember. But it was culturally done
Right.
that people would get promoted to the next rank, and you would receive your gun. Now, here's the funny thing. I'm not the only one they did this to. They did it to several people, but I'm the only one that probably received an empty box. And when I got it, I was shocked. I was shocked. And quite frankly, I was going to throw it in the burn pit. Really was.
Well, I'm glad you didn't.
But then I realized that sometimes you got to keep those hard moments and those hard incidents in your life to remember or remind yourself that you don't want to ever be put in that position again. And you don't want to see other people put in that position. So there you have it. I keep it as a memory. It's pretty on the outside, just like the Sheriff's Department, but it's empty and shallow on the inside.
We're about to wrap this up. I'm going to give you a chance to give a closing statement. And if you would, I noticed that you titled your article, The Walton Way. If you would go into that with your closing.
So, Walton County Way is a term that is used frequently when they don't necessarily follow the policy, or maybe they don't follow the law. And they kind of giggle about it and call it the Walton County Way, implying that we do things different in Walton County. Well, we do things different in Walton County, but that doesn't make it right. The Walton County Way is not right. There is a statute book that governs us, a very shallow policy manual, and a constitution. And if you want to see that all gone, the Walton County Way, I've even heard citizens say it back to me going, oh, you had a rough run-in with somebody. Because if you say that, that's what they threw at a citizen when they walked away with no action or inappropriate action. The Walton County Way is their way of telling you they're not going to do anything or they're not going to change what they've done. And that's unfortunate because as a citizen, you should know that. And you should know that there are options out there. I don't know Aaron Murray. I've never met the man, and I'm not receiving any benefit from him, and I will never return to law enforcement. But understand this. There you have a choice. And the Walton County Way is not the choice that you want to have.